Heyo, and welcome back to the What Am I Doing podcast. You are now joining us for part 2 of my conversation with Kori Hall about what's going on in Oklahoma City, ways to get involved in your community, and just kind of how the last year's treated our community. I'm not going to have this be long, but thank you for joining us again. If you haven't listened to the first part, you might want to do that before joining in on this one, because it basically goes directly into this. It's a continuation in the last part, so hopefully you enjoy. So, kind of along that line, I'd love to take a step deeper. So those are ways that we can step into the community. I mean, like we've talked about like a lot of stuff going around and like ways to be able to serve. I kind of want to talk about like the heart of OKC right now. Maybe like even the mental state it's kind of in. I feel like this has been a very weird but very, exposing year. So 2020 was really hard for a lot of people, and even the people who were like, I don't know, it wasn't that bad. Like they still suffered a little bit. You didn't get to go to concerts. You didn't get to go to your favorite restaurants for a while. Yeah. You know, how just because of the way that you're plugged in, and even what you do, like you're at frontline, so you do get to see things from a different perspective, and you're also very engaged with the city. So I feel like you get a very good look at this kind of stuff. How would you say, coming out of this year, some of the impacts and some of the things that have really weighed on the hearts of Oklahomans this year?
Yeah, I mean, I know things that have weighed on my heart personally is our city is in a lot of ways surviving. I wouldn't necessarily say as a whole it's thriving. With a lot of the social unrest that's happened in our nation, especially the things that have happened in this last few months, kicking off this summer, with violence and police brutality being the focus of American culture, that has brought back to the surface a long-standing issue in Oklahoma City of dealing with a really fraught police culture. And I think that in the midst of all of the protests that were happening this summer nationwide, there was a special interest and focus renewed in Oklahoma City on the issues that our police department has brought to the table in our city, for lack of better words. Basically, it's just really hard to ignore the fact that we don't have a culture where everyone feels served by our police and where all citizens feel safe to engage with our police officers. We have a really high rate of police-involved shootings in our city, and I think that the issue that kind of came to the table this year was there's a difference in how our citizens see the police and how the police see themselves. Yeah. There were a lot of city council meetings where there was arguing over the budget and what the needs of the police department are and how much money we should be putting towards policing versus how much toward alleviating poverty and suffering in our city. And in the midst of that, the issue keeps being brought to the table, not just because it's become a national epidemic, but because our city specifically is suffering from it in a unique way. And even in moments where we think we've named every victim and had a conversation about every person that has been killed by the police here in our city, as soon as we catch our breath, there's another person that comes up on that list and another life that's lost who was a person with a family and a hope and dreams and a life that should be honored. And in the midst of that, this past couple of months, we've had 2 shootings that have happened, and both of them were different and unique situations, but both of them resulted in the loss of life of a citizen of Oklahoma City. And in the midst of that, I think you can't ignore that tension. You can't ignore that massive problem. And I think activists and advocates in the city are wrestling with how can we claim to be the city that we want to be, that we're this innovative, fresh, pioneering city, but also we can't get our issues under control in a way that citizens feel safe and served, that people of color and people who struggle with mental health issues and people who are homeless are not constant targets of this type of violence. And so I think that is an issue that's always on the table. I think the other issues that we face are the fact that we live in a state that is not necessarily living up to the standard of being top 10 as our governor would like us to be, but we tend to fall into the bottom 10 in so many categories. We're low on the scales in education. We're high on the scales in teen pregnancy. We are, a state that's in deep poverty, and we have a lot of people who are suffering from mental health disorders, and we have a high rate of drug abuse and addiction, and we don't have enough resources to help those people. And I think that if we want to be the state and the city that we claim to be, we have to solve those issues.
Yeah.
We can't ignore them. We can't pretend like all of the good things like parks and basketball teams erase the fact that we have citizens who are suffering.
Right.
And so I think those conversations are constantly on the table, but uniquely this year because we are also facing this other pandemic, those conversations have been stirred up in a unique way. There have been a lot of people who stepped in to advocate for the ways that we need to address these things. And the hope is that the people who hold the power are listening and want to see those things fixed as well. I don't know necessarily if that is always the case, that they actually are listening and want to help. I think that there are people who for sure do, and then I think there are people who feel like there are other problems that are more worth their time in addressing. And so my hope is that people participate in our local elections, that people participate in like local government activities to make sure that the people that we elect to those offices are held to a high standard to take care of their citizens and fix these things, because we can't continue to just keep going round and round on these conversations.
Yeah.
It's a sad reality when the way that you feel about the country you live in, the state you live in, and the city you live in, or that you both love it and hate it. And I think a lot of people feel that tension this year, and don't know how to hold both of those things together. Like, I want to be able to wear my OKC t-shirts with pride, but I also know that repping that means I'm also repping a city that has a huge problem with police violence.
Right.
And so as much as I love my city and my neighborhood and my teams and our festivals and our fun, I also know that there are like people who have a real fear for their life and livelihood in this state, and I think we have to be able to address both of those things and hold them both equally with the same amount of weight. And those are hard conversations for people, and I don't think that everybody wants to like press into that, but I personally don't feel like I can live responsibly as a citizen if I don't think about both of those things.
Right.
And like being a Black woman, those things affect me personally and deeply, but also being a person who serves our homeless community and the community of people who struggle with mental health issues, that has come to the table over and over again for me, and I can't ignore it. And so I think that as a city we can't ignore those things, and I commend our city councilors and our activists and our nonprofit leaders and religious leaders who are working on these things and want to see change and are working towards change. And I in the nicest way, want to light a fire underneath the people who also hold those positions who don't care about those things, or are not, or are being perceived to not care because they're not speaking up or advocating or shifting their plans or behaviors. I want them to join us at the table to have these conversations and talk about these things and start to fix them. We are at we're at the precipice of the spot. We could go over the cliff and these issues become unmanageable and we become a city that we don't want to be, or we can step in right now and stop these things and turn direction so that we can be the city that we could be. And that goes for all these issues, but I think specifically about the issues we're talking about now. There are so many cities who are the same size as us, population-wise, who kind of let these things go a little too far, and now they can't create solutions because the problem is outsized.
Yeah.
And so, we talk about this a lot when it comes to homelessness. If we don't stop and fix the things that are broken now, we're going to end up becoming a city where the population of people who are without homes is so large that we won't be able to build enough homes and provide enough resources to care for them, and it'll become overwhelming. And I think we're almost past that point when it comes to like policing and when it comes to some other things. But I think that if we listen to the people who are advocating for change and think about how we can make sustainable policies to make our city safer, but also that every citizen is safe,
Yeah.
and that people do not feel fear when they're engaging with those who are called to protect and serve them.
Yeah.
I think we can shift things, but it's a long process, and it requires us to think differently about how we spend money and about what our culture should be when it comes to protection. And I think that those are harder conversations to have because people get scared anytime you mention the words policing, the words divestment, anything like that. People just get nervous because they don't know what another alternative could look like.
Right.
But we have to remember that, like, at all points in history, we didn't know what the alternative was going to look like. Post light bulb and pre light bulb were two different things. You can't imagine a city with Wi-Fi if you don't even have a light bulb yet.
Yep.
And so I think people get too caught up in how are we going to, like, instead of thinking about how we can get to a goal, they're like, well, what's it going to look like if we don't have this specific system that we've had for this many years? And it's like, well, we won't need that system if we have a new system.
Yeah.
You know, nobody cares about Morse code anymore unless you're me.
Yeah,
Like
unless you're kind of a history nerd,
yeah.
you know.
Or you like puzzles. But, like, it was necessary and needed at that time, and there was no way that people then could imagine life without it. And now it's a relic of the past that's an enjoyable history, like, fact, but we don't need it on a day-to-day basis because we have a new way to communicate that has become a staple for us. And so in the same way as we're thinking about things that have been staples of our community, and the way we think about safety, the way we think about protection, the way we think about, you know, keeping crime rates down, all of those things, we have to be able to, like, envision a future where we don't need the same systems that we have now because those systems don't work for everyone equally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is kind of a weird question, but I mean, even me, like, just what I've seen, but I would like to ask you as well, how have you seen our local church step into some of these really hard things? Because I know if we're just going to be brutal about it, like, we're in the Bible Belt. People, whether they're Christian or not, people, whether they like the church or not, are going to see the church and what they do.
Yeah.
And honestly, I'd like to see how you've kind of seen the local church. I mean, the good and the bad. Step into like the racial tensions, like the police situations, the homelessness situations. Because this last year, I know has been really hard for me to see some of the things. Like one of the shootings, like, I knew the person personally, like, really well, and so, like, that was really hard for me. And I know that I turned to my local church to kind of help me, like, process.
Yeah.
So how's that? How have you seen that in Oklahoma City this year?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to know because of COVID. I don't feel like I've had enough space to really have those conversations with other local church leaders and stay connected in the ways that I've been able to in the past. But just speaking from long-term experience of being in ministry for almost 18 years in some form, the church has always had a hard time speaking to these types of issues overall. I think that churches tend to advocate for the issues that are the closest to home and the most well-known and well-researched and the things that they have the most experience in. And so for a lot of churches, talking deeply about these types of issues of justice have not been on the forefront of their experience or directly affect their congregants, and so they don't always make room to talk about them. I think that there are churches who do a really great job of addressing these issues and being in the middle of the conversations and being at the table to advocate for reform and justice in a way that lines up with biblical principles, and that points people towards the light that Jesus is for those of us who believe. But I also think that churches overall just don't do a good job in that area. And it's weird to like work at a church and have a conversation about the broader church, because I can say like great things individually about the church that I go to, but I know that there are also spaces where we need to grow, and where people have like wanted to grow and are thinking through like ways to engage these issues at a deeper level. But as anybody in ministry knows, and anyone who's a follower of Jesus knows, there's so much brokenness in the world that it's a lot of weight to carry, to be thinking about all of the brokenness and conversations and how the church can meet those needs, serve the people who are hurting, and be a voice of like clear prophetic light in the midst of all the darkness. And so I think churches tend to like focus on one issue or another that they feel like the most attached to. But when you are in a city where like there are specific issues that are coming to the table and being brought to light, like churches have to be aware that the people who attend on Sundays are looking to them as spiritual leaders to help bring some clarity in all of the like muddled chaos that they're feeling.
Yeah.
And so like in this season, there are people who are looking to their church to speak clearly about COVID and about politics and about racial tension and about the issues that their states are working through. And I think some people receive that from their church leaders, but far fewer far fewer people receive that than those who actually need to hear it. And so I often have people reaching out to me who go to churches all across the city and even all across the country, who are just sad because they don't feel like their church leaders are giving those conversations enough space, and it's making them ask harder questions about where they are, and if they feel like their leaders are aware of these things or want to talk about them. But I've also been encouraged by the people who I've had conversations with whose leaders are pressing into these harder conversations, making public statements, teaching about them from their pulpits, and providing resources for those who are in their congregations to feel led and shepherded and informed. But it is the like sad reality that there's so much broken in this world, that we have hope that Jesus will ultimately redeem. But in the midst of that, we have to live in the midst of that brokenness. And so it's up to us to open our eyes to see it and step in the ways that God calls us to change it. But with the amount of brokenness that there is, I think people can kind of lose their way and feel overwhelmed by it sometimes and not speak clearly to the issues at hand because there's so many issues.
Yeah.
And I think that we have to be bold enough to step in and speak clearly to the things that like we see in front of us that are hurting people, that are harming people, and be a voice of like clear gospel witness that God, like that the God that we serve has so much more for us than brokenness.
Yeah.
That the God that we serve is a God of love and a God of justice and mercy, and that by Him inviting us into relationship with Him, He's invited us to bring that love and justice and mercy to the world, in the same way that He brings it, which is through the power of the Holy Spirit by the work of Jesus. And so I feel like churches who stand on that bring light into the world in a way that is different from churches who shy away from that. But that's a basic tenet of our faith as believers, is to be salt and light. And I think that we see in Scripture, it says when salt loses its saltiness, what is it good for? And I think a lot of people in America are experiencing tasteless churches. And that is not everyone. There are amazing churches in our city specifically that are really pressing into these harder conversations and issues and advocating for people who are in the margins. But overall in American culture right now, we are seeing the like fruits of our labor, which was like we labored in vain in a lot of ways, where like people put politics and preference and comfort above the gospel, and the fruit of that is being seen in our country today. It's very sad because it's not just racial tension and police violence, it's political insurrection and all of these other things that are happening that are merging together to create a firestorm in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah.
And so I think people are starting to recognize that these issues are not new to the table. These aren't things that just showed up out of nowhere. These are like consistent threads that have been winding their way through the American fabric for a long time, and now they've been pulled taut, and we're seeing the effect of that. I have so much hope for the church. I have so much hope for the global church. I have less hope for the American church, but I have hope still that God will do what he's going to do. Like, he doesn't need us, but he chooses to join us into his plan. But like, God is going to be God. He's going to be sovereign. He's going to be faithful. He's going to be just, and he's going to be true forever. And we get the beauty of being invited into those things that he already is, but he is those things regardless. And so I don't have to know what that's going to look like for the church. I don't have to know what that's going to look like for the church I work at, the churches that I attend in my lifetime, the churches that are in our city or our world. But God's church is going to move forward no matter what. I'm really thankful for the church and community that I have, because I really feel like the Lord is doing a huge work with the people there to help them think about mission and to think about how to serve their city, how to care well for each other, how to address hard conversations and issues, and that we've seen the fruit of that with people coming to know Jesus. But like, that work has very little to do with what we're doing. It's us being able to like come alongside of God's plan and his story. And so while I'm thankful for that community, I know that there are many people who are still looking for communities like that, and my hope is that more churches would be places of safety for people to come and experience the love of God, and heal from wounds that they have, and really experience what it looks like to be in a faithful Christian community who follows Jesus no matter the cost. And that means laying down our preferences and laying down our personal like expectations of what life will look like to pick up our cross and follow him.
Yeah. So following some of the expositions of the last year, some of the honestly like some really beautiful things coming out, like the fact that this is like this kind of conversation can happen now, like that people are actually thinking about this stuff, or even some of the hard things of just all of 2020 in general. Like, what are some hopes that you have for like maybe even 2021, or just for OKC in the near future and the people of this city?
Yeah, I hope that I do not have to be wearing a mask this summer. My hope is that by the middle of the year, we are maskless. I don't know if that's going to happen. My hope is that we can actually roll out an effective plan for how to distribute the vaccine, and people would be educated on the vaccine and feel knowledgeable about making the choice to take it or not, and that we would see some like movement forward with that. I am hopeful that we will start to see some movement in some of these long-term social issues that we've held. There are significant shifts that have happened in our nation in the last day, with political things shifting that may make room for us to see some significant changes in those areas. But we don't put our hope in that, but we do expect that people who are hired for a job do the job they're hired for. Mm-hmm. And so I think that those are some things we can look forward to. I'm really hopeful that this year will bring people back to a space where the things that they were kind of denied in this past season, like one-on-one time and personal face-to-face conversations, that it will like give people like a desire and stir in their heart a longing for those things, and so that people will move toward each other in a society where, like, because of social media and technology and the internet, we can compartmentalize and isolate. A lot of people are realizing the need for like friendship and companionship and community, and I I want people to like step into that deeply. And then my hope is that like the church would still be a light in the darkness, that people who follow Jesus would share like the ways that he's changed their life and the things that he's done to redeem us, and that would be spread in a way that honors people's story and journey, but also like honors the fact that the gospel is true. And so I have hope for that. And I hope that I'll be able to travel and see a live concert in the next year.
Man, I feel both of those so bad.
Yeah, that's really it.
That's awesome. Well, seriously, thank you for meeting up with me today. I've had such a good time with this conversation. I'm really glad that we got to do this.
Hey, thanks for joining us for a really cool conversation about what's going on in the city, what's just been happening, and how the state of the city and being able to participate in things as a community are going. If you have any questions about anything we talked about, or if you have any disagreements, or if you'd rather kind of dive into some areas deeper, feel free to reach out to us. I can always probably get a hold of Kori and we can answer those questions in private or even on the show or things like that. Be looking forward to new stuff coming out. There's going to be new episodes. There's going to be some really cool content and a couple things coming up your way. So keep your eyes on the horizon and listen out for new episodes of the podcast. I'm really excited for what has been done already, the people I've gotten to talk to, and also the things that are going to be coming out. I have some really cool ideas, and I'm hoping hit the ground running. So yeah, I'm always open for feedback, and this is the end of this episode, so I hope you have a good one till next time I see you or next time you're listening. See you later.